Hello and welcome back to Down the Yarra, the podcast that takes you on a deep dive into the heart and soul of Naarm-Melbourne and South Central Victoria. I'm your host Andy, and today we're travelling beyond the Yarra, across the bay to where Victoria's colonial history began, with the ill-fated penal colony at Sullivan Bay in Sorrento. First, let's acknowledge something important. This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded lands of the Wathaurong people of the Eastern Kulin Nation. We recognise and pay our deepest respects to all First Nations people and their elders, past and present. We acknowledge their continued connection to lands, water, sky, culture and community. We stand with them in their ongoing calls for truth-telling, treaty, sovereignty, justice and reconciliation. This was, and always will be, Aboriginal land. Quick heads up, this episode includes historical references to child incarceration, colonial violence and exile. So please, listen with care. Before Hobart, before even Melbourne, and long before Federation, there was Sorrento. In 1803, the British decided to flex their imperial muscles and establish a convict outpost at Sullivan Bay, Sorrento, hoping to beat the French in colonialising southern Australia. But all went wrong from the start. There was no fresh water, no reliable food sources, and no safe anchorage, no safe harbour. The local Wathaurong people, who lived in harmony with the land for tens of thousands of years, rightfully saw the newcomers as invaders. By early 1804, just 7 months in, the colonial authorities gave up. They packed up, loaded the convicts and sailors onto ships and relocated to what is now modern-day Hobart, Tasmania. But not everyone left, however. Amongst the convicts was a tall man, former bricklayer, soldier, and now turned convict. His name, William Buckley. On Christmas Eve, 1803, he and 2 others slipped into the bush, hoping to walk all the way to Gadigal country, Sydney. They had no maps, no real supplies, only desperation. One man died, one turned back, but Buckley kept on going. Eventually, exhausted and near death, he found shelter in a sea cave, what is now modern-day Point Lonsdale, on the other side of Port Phillip Bay. He was discovered by the Wathaurong people, mistaken for a spirit of a recently deceased elder. They offered him care, kinship, and a second chance. Buckley lived with the Wathaurong for 30 plus years. He learned their language, married, hunted, and participated in ceremonies. He disappeared from the eyes of the empire until one fateful day when the empire came calling again. Now, let's rewind to the short-lived penal colony at Sorrento, which I am now here. Amongst the convicts and sailors was a 10-year-old boy named John Pascoe Fawkner. He'll become important later. His father, a convicted felon, had been transported, and young John had no say in his fate. Imagine a child pulled from familiar shores, living amongst chains, rations, and brutal disciplines. After moving to Tasmania, young Fawkner grew up amongst punishment and hardship, but also literacy and ambition. When his opportunity arose, he seized it. Decades later, in 1835, Fawkner chartered the Enterprise, a schooner that sailed up back to Port Phillip district, aiming to settle what would become Naarm-Melbourne. Yes, Naarm. But someone was already there. Enter John Batman, another colonial figure with eyes on Port Phillip. Armed with plans for land acquisition and men to enforce it, the Wathaurong were worried. Out from the bush emerged a stranger, tall, sunlit, wrapped in kangaroo skins, speaking a language of the land. It was William Buckley. After 30 years in exile, Buckley found himself caught between two worlds. He became a translator and a cultural bridge, but it also disrupted and alienated. The settlers couldn't trust him, and his alliance with the Wathaurong shifted, unfortunately. Buckley eventually accepted a pardon, but he never truly found peace. Meanwhile, Fawkner helped establish the colony that would become Naarm-Melbourne on the other side of the bay. From sea caves to lost colonies to the shadows inland. Next time on Down the Yarra, we explore the haunting ruins of one of Victoria's darkest institutions, the eerie asylum, Yarra Bend Asylum, and the bodies buried underneath what is now public golf course. You won't believe what still lingers there. Thanks for joining me on this coastal journey. If you've enjoyed the series, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment, so you won't miss another episode, hidden chapter of Melbourne's past. Better yet, drop a comment below and tell me, what would you do if you were in Buckley's shoes? Until next time, I'm your host, Andy, and this has been Down the Yarra.